All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry, we are having massive technical issues. I don't know if we are. I don't know if YouTube's trying to shadow ban us or what's going on, but this is not the original URL. Welcome to Deprogrammed, by the way. It's Thursday, March 14th. This is a separate stream other than the one that we advertised with Pat Dixon. Pat is coming on, but for some reason, YouTube will not let us go live with the scheduled broadcast. There's no go live button. We've tried troubleshooting a lot of different ways, so I apologize. We're going to wait just a few minutes. I've got to send these guys an invite so I can get Keri back and get Pat back into this particular hangout. So bear with me for a moment. I'm sorry. I'm going to sit here and click some buttons. Okay, hey. This is Keri. And I'm going to also, hey, Keri.
Hi.
I probably can't hear you.
Are we live?
Because I don't have my earpiece in.
Okay.
Hey, Keri, can you talk?
I'm talking. Can you hear me?
Keri?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm talking.
Oh, maybe no one could hear me before. Keri, can you speak?
I'm speaking. Hello.
I see your little thing. I just can't hear you, so probably everyone else can hear you, and it's my fault on my end. I don't know if everyone heard me just announce. Sorry that we're having technical difficulties. YouTube wouldn't let us go live with our original broadcast, so for some reason. So we had to do a new one. I don't know why it is. We thought we were being shadow banned, but I don't think we're that important. But here we are live, and hopefully I can't hear Keri. Keri, can you again?
Can you guys hear me? Can everybody else hear me?
I totally can't hear you, but I wonder if I exit and come back in.
And I sent the link to Pat, so he should be here in a minute.
Because I cannot hear you.
You guys, thanks for watching and standing by with us.
Whatever it is.
It's always something, isn't it?
But it's really not our fault. I don't think.
So is it at Carter? Are we live at the like the link that we tweeted out for people to watch? Is that the same link or is it a different one now?
Okay, Keri, I think I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
No, yes.
I can. Pat, can you hear? Can we hear Pat?
Yeah.
Yay.
Awesome.
Can you hear me swallow, by the way?
We can't hear you swallowing.
Okay.
You know what? I will.
Carter,
yes.
Just a quick question. So for people to watch, is it the same link that we sent out before?
No, it's a new one, and I've got to go find it. So
okay, cool.
let me go do that. We're just gonna be weird and unprofessional, and sit here for a moment. What?
No, I said like we're always weird and unprofessional, I guess.
Oh, yeah, fair.
This is just the worst though, Pat. It's usually not this bad. I'm sorry we got delayed.
No,
so
it's been getting better. We have like a little thing going on. It's been fine, but let's see. All right, I'm gonna get the URL and tell everyone.
Yeah, post it in the chat for the old one because everybody's there.
Okay, I will do that too. Where is the old one? Let's see. Man, what a mess. So this is
that's fine.
I kind of hope that it's just a YouTube technical bug.
You know what? Like yesterday, Facebook and Instagram were down for a while, but I don't know if it was just, was it for you too? I thought it was just for people in Austin at first.
I don't know. I saw that it was down, but I didn't check. All right. Hey everyone. YouTube won't let this stream go live. All right. Comment is there. I'm also going to do that. Put it in chat. So I put it in the comments and the chat.
Okay.
Of the old one. All right, and then we just tweet it out, and then
we'll start.
Pat will never want to deal with us ever again.
This is great.
This makes all the times that dogs have interrupted seem like nothing.
Pat, I'm very confident it's not our fault. This is not like we've done this a million times. This is freaking YouTube.
I'm confident also. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is not. Yeah.
Well, if they do, I'm not saying it's purposeful, but if they do mess with channels, I think it's easier, of course, to mess with small channels like ours who are starting to gain a following, because there aren't that many people yet who are going to complain. Like, we're just growing. But
yeah, maybe they're just testing for like, see what they can do with the big boys later. They can get away. We'll see. They'll try different techniques. Okay, with that, let's actually start the show. I think I've tweeted out to everyone. I've put the comments. I put the link in the comments. I've put the link on YouTube in the chat. Okay. So I think we're pretty good.
We're good. So, let's go.
Normally, I would say something like, welcome to Deprogrammed on Unsafe Space. I'm Carter Laren, and I'm here with the Bad Mamma Jamma, my co-host, Keri. Hi, Keri.
Hi, Carter.
Yay.
Hi, guys.
You can go to unsafespace.com, where we ought to just build our own video publishing site, clearly. And you can follow us on YouTube at Unsafe Space. We're actually also on Gab at Unsafe, I think is our handle on Gab. Today we have a special guest who has been patient, has been like half an hour worth of patience so far, sitting around waiting for us to pull our heads out of our asses. Pat Dixon. Pat is a New York City podcaster and comic, and the host of the only comedy podcast dedicated to reporting the most violent, bizarre, and newsworthy crimes as sensationally reported in the New York Post and Daily News. As a national touring stand-up for over 20 years, he's been almost everywhere, and he can be seen regularly in clubs in New York. Pat, welcome. Thank you for your patience.
I'm thrilled to be here. It's funny because I actually had to cancel a show to be here. And the show that I canceled is called Safe Space.
Seriously?
Yeah.
To do Unsafe Space.
Well, Unsafe Space is better despite technical difficulties, because you're allowed to say whatever you want. So how can people follow you or pay attention to what you're doing, Pat? What's the best way for them to follow you?
I don't even know anymore.
All right, then.
Joking.
You have a Twitter handle.
Joking. I'm sorry. Yeah. Twitter handle's at Pat Dixon, and that's as good a way as any. crimereport.nyc is kind of a place that I post a lot of podcasts and stuff, so that's a good place to go. crimereport.nyc.
Cool.
Yeah.
So let's get Pat. I'm just going to jump into it since we've already lost like half an hour.
You can say the word wasted, Keri. I heard that
wasted. I was really excited to have you on because, so for people who don't know, which I guess if you watch the show you would, but I worked in comedy as a manager for, I don't know, 10 years or something. And I didn't know Pat then, but I'm sure we know a lot of people in common. And one of the things I noticed in comedy, because it was my intention was to push this SJW, what I call the SJW ideology, through comedy or through entertainment. And I saw it taking, and at least from my perspective, it seems to have taken root, especially in the past 5 years. Comedy seems to be changing. And so I would just love to hear from a comedian. Is that in my head, or do you think comedy has been changing in the past few years? Is it noticeable?
Well, I mean, changing comedy is like changing the weather or something. Or it's like they have no power to change comedy. I mean, like if I'm looking at comedy like in a broad sense, saying like what they're creating isn't necessarily comedy, and so I mean the idea of selling something as something other than it is probably not new, but it doesn't work with comedy because with comedy there's an instantaneous approval, disapproval metric called laughter. And if people aren't doing it, then it's not successful comedy, and people will never laugh at Nanette or a lot of the other comedians that they try and put forth. So I have noticed it. The attempt, I think that an article that I read in The Guardian, I believe it was, it was just this outlandish story, and it was talking about the new comics and how they are redefining what comedy is, and they're trying, you hear a lot of redefinition of comedy, that's really important. Expanding the boundaries of comedy, because they can't just say, well, no, it's funnier than the other guys. That article amounted to a declaration of war. So yeah, I've noticed it. But
was that the article that basically said laughter doesn't matter anymore as a metric?
I'm sure that it did. Yeah, I'm sure that it did. People who say that are, and I'll tell you a reason a lot of this happens is, when you start to want a certain thing talked about in clubs or whatever, and you promote, it's sort of like how do I put it? Like if somebody is strictly speaking a diversity hire, you know what I mean? And they're there to represent, and this is in any company, then you're making kind of like the job secondary, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of like the post office saying, well, delivering letters isn't really important anymore, or it's the chief function of it's what makes comedy. So it's a very interesting kind of time we're living in, isn't it?
Well, so what was I was one of my favorite things about zombie movies, let me take a little departure for a second, is the beginning of a zombie movie where you start to see that something's different, like where the people are encountering something different, but they don't yet realize they're living in a new world. When they're just starting to notice that something's changing. Sure. And I kind of view PC culture like that, where people come into contact with it in different ways, where they maybe don't realize yet. They just think it's one odd occurrence that happened to them, or they notice something odd happen, but they don't yet realize they're living in this new world. Were there some of those kind of signs, I would say, like in comedy, where you were like, this is kind of strange that this is happening? Or were there any sort of warning signs that this PC culture was becoming big?
Well, I think, more recently, I guess, I mean, them trying to take down Louis C.K., the kind of, they really tried to take Louis C.K. and turn him into Bill Cosby, I think. That was the whole idea. Like, they're like, well, hey, he's just another comedian. So, yeah, they get you to, I think, as I started to see how they were equating, trying to kiss somebody or something like that with, and truly being mistaken about it, as that becomes, another rape victim in the list, right? Which it's not nice, or maybe it's a mistake or whatever, but it is a rape. Then they can say, like, equate, from comedian to comedian, I mean, it was kind of a reach. The thing that made me happy about the Louis C.K. thing, though, is that, he really did come back hard. I think he can only do comedy one way, and that's like excellently. And he is going to go ahead and say everything he has to say, and that's really crucial. The idea of social justice is so incompatible with comedy anyway. With all these that you're supposed to sing the praises of everyone or something, or congratulate everybody, or whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing. It's not funny. You can't get laughs with it. But you asked me about signs. And, a few years ago, I stopped doing racial jokes altogether after someone threw a glass at me.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't think that was, that might not have been connected to social justice. I think that guy was just a redneck. But I also wanted to make sure that I didn't want to leave, for me personally, it was actually a good choice. So, as I try to think of signs, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say as a comedy manager, because sometimes comedians live inside their heads a little bit.
Well, some of the early signs, I mean, again, I was pushing this ideology. So, I was quite happy
when you were declaring victory on these things.
Yeah. I was one of those people who, when the whole remember the rape joke controversy? And Lindy West, the feminist blogger.
Wait, I'm a layperson. What are you talking about? Tell people, because he might remember the rape joke thing, but I don't. Okay. So that means our audience probably doesn't. What are you talking about?
There was a piece written about a comedian. Was it Tosh?
Yeah, Tosh was in California, and he was doing a set, and a woman took offense or whatever. It became a heckling thing, and then he said something about, you know, wouldn't it be funny if this one got gang raped right now? You know, so he made a joke.
And then there was a big piece that went around, and then a lot of the SJW journalists and bloggers started writing about it, and it became this big online conversation that was happening in the comedy world and in the SJW world about whether you can do rape jokes or not. And at the time, I was executive producing what I considered to be an SJW late night show called Totally Biased. And we did a whole episode, we did a whole segment about the rape joke controversy. And I mean, that was one of those things where, as someone who believed, I was a true believer, you know, I'm like, we're doing good. Like, we're changing the world. And so, I mean, looking back on it, that whole show actually was a sign, because I couldn't have imagined a show like that getting made 10 years prior. And I felt like, oh, we've come so far. We're doing a show where we talk about toxic masculinity and cultural appropriation and, you know, all of these fucking buzzwords. And now, excuse my language, and now it's kind of mainstream. Then I started to see comics who had never done that kind of material doing shows like that. Like Moshe Kasher did Problematic. And I'm like, why is I never saw him doing that kind of comedy before. And suddenly it was like comics that had never even dipped their toe into the SJW world were doing jokes about the same kind of stuff. It seemed to me anyway, it was becoming mainstream.
Right. Oh, okay. So Moshe Kasher is an example of the mainstream to you?
I don't know. Well, he had he got the comedy. No, I just mean
that's a true insider right there. A true insider.
In order to get like a television show, it was like then people were sort of having to put forth some of these tenets of belief. It seemed that way to me anyway.
So you're saying people exploit the virtue signaling of the left to further their careers, Keri? That's I can't fathom this.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that is a sign, though, that it is kind of like you know, the bubble is getting larger and, you know, popping all over us when you know, it becomes a mainstream deal like that. I guess is what you meant. I mean, like, we exploit it. I mean, it's been exploited or whatever. But I think it's a good point that when it becomes when you think of mainstream, you know, we're talking about everybody's talking about it on Twitter or everybody's talking about it online and stuff like that, and that leaves out all these people that pay to see comedy shows everywhere, all the people that they supposedly want watching their television shows, and it's like
that is a good point.
Completely different world, you know. The online is like gone. It's like a snake pit. We've lost that battle, that war there.
That is a good point. I sometimes forget that because I'm so focused on that very vocal minority, and it may be a minority, but they have a lot of power and they have a big voice.
They certainly do. They're very effective too. I mean, you can lose your job. I mean, obviously, you know, it's terrible. It really is. I think it's a terrible thing.
Are the comedians themselves bought in, or are they just like, I'm just going to shut my mouth and pretend to be bought in on this so I don't, you know, get kicked off stage?
You know, I think there's probably both kinds, you know, but a certain percentage of comics are like this. They, you know, a lot of stand-ups don't pay attention to politics or, you know, social whatever, you know, they just kind of go and get laughs. So like a guy will, you know, who doesn't know anything about anything, will say in 2016 or 15, he mentioned Trump on stage and he got a little laugh and he's like, okay. And then so for the Late Show, he goes back and he goes, he expands on it a little bit. And now, you know, he's getting an applause break. And then, you know, by the weekend, it's like, you know, Trump fucked a dog, you know? and people are, well, all the rebookings and everything, and then when you go, well, what do you really think about all this, you know, and they go, well, my Trump bit's killing.
Yeah. Yeah, fair.
Yeah,
that's a very pragmatic approach.
Yeah.
Do you like, you've heard like mainstream, like, so when I think about mainstream comedians, I think about people like Jerry Seinfeld, but like years ago they would you know, they told us they weren't going to perform on college campuses anymore. People like Seinfeld, because the audiences, yeah, and Chris Rock, because the audiences were so hypersensitive. Do you think that's the case generally, or is it just college campuses, or like, do you get you're out about not being a social justice warrior? Like,
right.
You're out as a Trump voter, so like how do you get treated?
You're out as a Trump voter?
Well, I guess I am now. Yeah, okay, I am.
Yeah, your Proud Boys shirt didn't give anything away.
I'm just sort of hoping that nobody does their research at this point. You know, I don't look. I mean, my approach to comedy is different. I would perform for any SJW audience anytime, and I would do great. You know, I don't have any fear of that. Like, I can talk for an hour and never bring anything up that's going to offend anybody. I prefer not to have to do that, of course. But is it like that across? You know what? It's really not. It's really, the audiences are audiences still. You know, and it's great. Performing in New York, there's a lot of tourists who come, and they're not as infected with all this stuff as the Upper West Side. You know. And they have a completely different attitude, you know. I mean, they're kind of relieved when they, you know, when you're talking about when you're not bashing, or when I see guys trying to get political, and they do the things sometimes in the clubs that they do if they're open mics, or whatever, you know. Occasionally you see that kind of thing. That gives you an idea of the excellent class of clubs I'm working, by the way. But they, you know, they try to like just preach to the converted or whatever, and the converted are not always in the clubs, but you know, they have, of course, the strength of their convictions that they're right. You know, racism's bad or whatever, which I think, you know, racism being bad is not really a political point anyway, is it? I mean, I think it's something that everybody agrees on. No, it's sort of a fake kind of an issue, you know. I mean, like, it's you're raising an issue and fighting a battle that really isn't there, or you know, they are, or whatever. So like, when someone's picking a fight with you about something you don't even care about, then like, I guess the tendency is to cave. So I guess a lot of that goes on too. But you know, when we think of it as sensitivity, it's really not. It's you know, it's a power move. It's control. And I think, and I'm obviously aware of that, but like, until we kind of start looking at it as what, remember, people used to think of people so snowflakes, and they're so, you know, oh gosh, they're so weak and they're so vulnerable and all that. And you know, that sort of mockery doesn't work, because it isn't really, they know it isn't true. You know, I mean, they're looking, they love you using being offended to get something you want, or to stop something from happening, is like is so common now. And
it's so authoritarian. They're like little tyrants.
They're little control freaks. Yeah.
It's and that's we gotta, you know, we think of them as, and again, you know, there's like, they're little tyrants, they're little, but you know, they're adults walking around voting, you know. I mean, they're the enemy. They're a serious thing, you know. I mean, like, it could be a big problem if they can shut enough people up and get enough people scared. And I don't see how they haven't done that yet, because almost everybody you talk to is afraid to talk about this stuff.
It seems like everyone is, not everyone, you aren't, but I think a lot of people are self-censoring, obviously, right?
Totally.
Oh no, I'm totally self-censoring. If I was saying all the things I want to say right now, oh my god, no. It's yeah. I mean, everybody. I mean, but all human beings are, to a point, you know. I mean, yeah, but they are self-censoring. You're right. They prefer not to get involved. It's like they don't have a conviction in all this. They don't really realize how important it is to be able to say what you want. And it is just crucial, because they've equated free speech with racism. You know, the worst thing you can be is a racist. I mean, you get fired for it, and like all that stuff, and you lose your, I mean, you're a complete outcast. And it's funny how they, if you are one step off, if you're one quarter turn away from believing what they believe, then you're a Nazi. You know, it's as simple as that. And so there's so many more Nazis now than there used to be.
I think that's, I've noticed that too. The whole calling everyone a Nazi became really popular after Trump won. And I think part of that is just so they can try and defend violence against people they don't like. So who was it? It was Nick DiPaolo who got punched in the face recently after a show by a feminist.
About a year ago, right? But yeah.
Something like that. I just heard about it. But I think that's kind of, it's crazy because on the one hand, they're declaring places like comedy clubs to be hate-free zones, and people are having to sign contracts about what they won't say. But then they have no problem with being actually physically violent against someone who they deem to be a Nazi.
Well, and people see these cases and they go and they consider it to be an outlier. You know, oh my God, you believe the nerve on that girl? Well, she must have had her period. You know, but like it's serious. It's like that's the norm. It really is. And that's what that kind of thinking leads to, that like you said, forgiving violence against Nazis and stuff like that. That the ends justify the means, or the, you know, I think they think that the intent justifies the means. You know, it's okay to, you know, so long as you're trying to do the right thing, it's fine if a few guys get falsely accused. I have no problem with that. I mean, you hear that a lot. Like,
oh yeah,
you don't hear what you're saying. All these concepts they have are completely incompatible with the justice system and every tradition that we have as Americans. And yet we think that, oh, that's just, they're overstepping there or whatever. And like, nobody really wants to give it a lot of thought. But I mean, like, for me as a comedian, you know, being able to say what you want or think what you want. And even before I was a comedian, it was just the kind of thing that, you know, we were talking before the show that, and Keri's an oldest, right, sibling, but I'm a youngest. And so as a youngest sibling, everybody's telling you to shut up all the time, you know? And if you're the oldest, you're the one telling people to shut up all the time, usually, you know? So it's funny that you used to be, you know, advocating for social justice like this. Thank God that you're not. I'm sure you're a powerful weapon. But, you know, it's always been important to me to be able to say those kind of things, or to say whatever. And so, like, I get really, you know, worked up anyway over people trying to censor other people. It's natural. Yeah. Sorry,
is comedy, is there anything special about, like, a lot of people when they think about free speech, they think about like Martin Luther King should be able to speak even if the powers that be don't like what he has to say or whatever. But in comedy, I think to a lot of people, comedy feels like it's not important, in the sense that, like, you know, comedians aren't out running for president or making huge political speeches. They're just making you laugh. But it also seems to be like the easiest place to detect that there's a censorship train coming, because it seems to be the easiest. And once you censor comedy, you're actually censoring what people laugh at, which is kind of a weird self-censor thing. Like, now I'm not supposed to find something funny because they've said that's bad, which now I have to like censor my own psychology, because laughter is very involuntary, and comedians have to kind of censor what they're even thinking about. It seems like a pretty insidious way to start going after free speech.
Wow, what a great point, because it climbs right into your head and goes to the heart of your most natural instincts, you know, to laugh at something that's funny. And I think that they will be, I think that they're going to find that that's insurmountable. I don't really think people are willing to self-censor themselves psychologically out of a good time, you know, after they've worked all week, you know, and paid their money, you know, and stuff. They want to laugh, and they don't have any choice. You know, laughter is not always a voluntary thing, you know. Now with SJW comedians, the audience will, you'll hear a lot of like voluntary laughter and a lot of like forced laughter. I noticed that at one time that became like the worst kind of comedian to follow, because an audience really feels put upon by that kind of thing when they know that somebody is intersectional enough to where, you know, they intuit that they have to sort of like, you know, work a little harder as an audience to make sure that this person is a success, and they will, and they resent it. And if you follow someone like that, you really better be funny, because they have all their benefit of the doubt is gone.
They're tired.
Like, yeah. And especially you come up as a white man after that, you know, especially someone in their, you know, however old I am, who was in their 40s, who was like, you know, not someone that they're supposed to like necessarily automatically approve of, you know, and yeah. So it being an involuntary deal, climbing into people's heads like that, that is the idea. And that's why attacking comedy is important. Comedy is really the only weapon that there is against this kind of thing. Because, I mean, you know, you cannot debate it. You can't, there's no debating with, you know, you're talking to a wall, you know. So with comedy, as they do try and attack that and do that, yeah, people have to people self-censor their laughter too. If and that's, I mean, that's always gone on, you know, like just as an example, if you're talking to a group of people and say for whatever reason, say you're in I don't know, Iowa or Idaho or Montana, and there's 2 black people in the room and the rest are white, they will sort of like take their cues on anything that seems to like skate close to you know, a racial thing, and they're very careful about this. You know, I mean, you can see how browbeaten audiences are by the way they'll stifle and sort of like wait and see, because so many things that we used to think were okay aren't now, and that's why it's so effective for people to judge people based on you know, they're judging people by 2019 standards, but they're judging stuff they did 15 years ago. Yeah. And they can take anybody out that way. I mean, Jesus Christ, we all used to say stuff that was just wildly inappropriate, you know, but some people are immune. Have you noticed that? Like Howard Stern and his like blackface, you know, and all that. I mean, you can find these crazy clips talking to Sherman Helmsley on YouTube. You know, I saw this and like, wow, this is.
What do you think makes him immune? What makes Howard?
No clue. I guess he's that connected, you know. I guess they would, you know what it is? I'll tell you what makes him immune. They'd rather keep him as one of them than to put him on the enemy side. You know what I mean?
Then so turn him into a very, formidable enemy.
Because he would be a powerful opponent, is what you think.
That's right. So he's a friend of ours. That makes it okay. And so that proves conclusively, you know, that it is not about anything anybody actually says ever. You know, never.
I think those who have also had a conversion to SJW ideology, those guys get a pass. Like I used to be a huge fan of I think Sarah Silverman has converted. I think Pat Oswalt has converted. These are people I used to think were hysterical. And if you look at some of the stuff they did, like you said, 15 years ago, it does not line up with the ideology they're preaching now. No. But they get a pass because they've had that conversion moment. I read this piece that you wrote recently. I read part of it, Pat. It's called, the headline is, "If you hate comedy, then you'll love the new comedy."
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a piece in here about one of the biggest hypocrites, I think, is Judd Apatow. And, you know, because he's, for people that don't know, he's been leading this charge against Louis C.K. And after Louis C.K. disappeared for a while, and then he came back and did a set, like a 15-minute set. There was this really funny line you had about, oh, here it is. Can I read this?
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Where Judd Apatow tweeted about Louis C.K. "This hacky, unfunny, shallow routine is just a symptom of how people are afraid to feel empathy. It's much easier to laugh at our most vulnerable than to look at their pain directly and show them love and concern. Louis C.K. is all fear and bitterness now. He can't look inward." And so then Pat you wrote, "If only C.K. would take Apatow's advice and call his next stand-up special, Louis C.K. looks directly at the pain of our most vulnerable and shows them love and concern." Nothing says gutbuster like looking directly at our most vulnerable and showing them love and concern. Anyway,
thanks. I appreciate that. Thanks. Yeah, it's not funny. It's really nothing fun. It's not that you have to take the opposite point of view. You know, you're like, oh no, look at them, like and point at people that are laughing or that are, you know, hurt or something like that, and laugh at people who fall down. But it's just that why the fuck would anybody ever do that? Show love and concern on stage. That's ridiculous, you know. That recording he's talking about was made at a club called Governors in Long Island, which is like the anti-love and concern capital of the world. And like they are not interested in hearing anything like that. Come on. I mean, like, what connection is it? That is just ridiculous. Our most vulnerable, you know, as if they're in the room either. You know, that's another thing is people have like developed an emotional connection to everything that happens, so that, like, you know, everything is too soon and everything is wrong, you know. But like, you know, nobody's trying. New York City Crime Report, the show that I do, is about, you know, the crimes that happen in New York City, and like, there's people throw their babies out of windows and stuff like that, you know.
Wow.
And I'm sorry, but I don't know anybody like that. You know, I didn't throw a baby out a window, and I think that's ridiculous. And like, I like to talk about stuff like that. And if you pick around the edges, you can find a way to have fun with it that doesn't necessarily directly assault, you know, the sensibilities of someone who's concerned about a victim or something, which I understand, but you don't know them. So like, you know, it's not as if it's a verboten topic. So like, this fake emotional connection to everything is a bit of a, it's a bit, to use the SJW word, problematic.
Problematic.
You know, and like, I had Jerry, oh my God, I'm blanking on his name, but he wrote Permanent Midnight, Jerry Stahl, on the show. And I was talking about a woman who threw her baby out of a window, you know, and making some jokes about it. I mean, I made about 4 or 5 jokes in a row about it. And so he goes, so is this what we're doing? We're taking the piss out of a baby who was thrown out of a window here, you know? And it was like, yeah, it's the show, you know? You know, but like, he was just questioning. I mean, I guess especially coming from the West Coast at the time or whatever. I mean, like, you know, and I know he lives all over, whatever, but like, maybe you get used to like people not, I don't know, whatever. Not everybody does these kinds of things, talks about these kinds of things. But I just told him, you know, yeah, and I would stop talking about it gladly when women stop throwing babies out of windows, you know.
Wait, so is New York? So I'm on the West Coast. I grew up upstate New York, but a lot of family in the city. I haven't been there I mean, I've visited, but I haven't really been there for 20 years. The West Coast, like out here in San Francisco, it is very, I'll call it bland, from a humor perspective, at least from what I can tell. And I listened to your show, and there was just some refreshing things that actually started the conversation with me and Keri, because you, just for example, you used the word retard on the show, like pretty liberally. Yeah. And it's something that, you know, growing up, you know, we wouldn't call actually like mentally disabled people retards, but we would call our friends and other people that did stupid things retards. And sure, that was a normal thing. And Keri and I both noticed that in the past few years, we kind of self-censored a little bit on that word, and it's kind of refreshing to have someone kind of just bring it back. And your show is very New York. That was like, it's quintessential New York.
Oh yeah. Well, I have to say something about the retard thing, you know, because like that is the epitome of a false sensitivity that people have. I mean, I don't, you know, my brother has like a severely disabled baby, you know, with Down syndrome and everything, and a beautiful, precious child. I don't want to talk about that on stage. I don't want to talk about that in reference to anything funny. It's just kind of a, you know, whatever, you know. But my attitude towards the child is everything that it should be. I'm not a monster. The word retard is something I grew up with, and like, it's who does this offend is what I have to keep asking myself. Mm-hmm. Is like, you know, when you call someone a retard, you're not like pointing at an actual retarded person, you know, and dehumanizing them and depriving them of their human rights or something. You know, you're using a term which we all understand, and which happens to be, you know, just one of those inherently funny words, and it's a great reason to pick on it, I guess. I wonder if now, if I use that word on stage in stand-up to a general audience, people will laugh. You know, they always will, and it's the same with the word faggot.
But those are total SJW no-nos. I mean, I know you know this.
I'm a little uncomfortable with the word faggot.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
No, yeah. I mean, like, it's, you know, believe me, the reason why is because they keep telling you better be uncomfortable with this word. Yeah. And it's like, again, you know, just like with retards, you're not like, you know, going to gay people and like trying to persecute them with this word and everything. You know, Louis is just such a fascinating kind of case in point, because he had one of the first episodes of his show, he had a guy, Rick Chrome, was actually the gay guy in the show. They're playing cards. You know, people know this famous scene where he's just talking about the word faggot and how it's offensive and how the way it's been used and the way it got created and all that stuff. Do you recall the scene I'm talking about? It was
I don't.
Okay,
I don't either. So
okay, well,
yeah.
it was I guess maybe talked about more amongst comedians or something. But anyway, in his show, he had, and so I actually play in that card game where that's in reference to. I mean, that's a real thing. The Eddie Brill card game has been going on for like 25 or 30 years, and I've played in it for about 10, and I'm the new guy. So like. As I'm watching this happen, first of all, a conversation like that never happened. It never would happen. Someone holding the cards so they can talk about the origin of a fucking word would never be tolerated at this card game. Deal, So it kind of like makes you like subscribe to a lack of realism that's not there. But like, also, who gives a shit? I think that Nick DiPaolo saved that whole scene with one funny line at the end, like saying like, deal faggot or something. It's just, the thing is like people who are watching you live are responding to your actual energy, what you're putting out there, and what you seem like. Do you seem harmless, and are you harmless? And they get a read on you that's like collectively they're a genius. They can tell if you're secretly angry or resentful about something. They can tell if they know stuff about you don't know sometimes. So like, but they will laugh if you are if you're not a snake. And if you don't mean it the way that,
right.
because they can't help it. They've already accepted you and they're down with it, So that's the true test. If people are laughing, it's funny, period. And, that's it.
I'm sure have you heard this, this thing they're trying to say now, which is SJW say the true test is not laughter. It's whether you're punching up or punching down. You heard the punching up, punching down thing?
Yeah. How is that the true test? And in what sense punching up or down?
Can we define that? Because I will be an awesome comedian if I just have to follow that rule and no one laughs.
Yeah, you just have to punch up. They're cool with that. But see, they don't know what's up and down, and that there's no nuance there. Even if you agree with them, even if you agreed with, you shouldn't punch down and take as the target of your jokes people who are vulnerable. You should only attack the powerful. Even if you agree with that, there's no context there. Like you
just always attack Trump and you're safe.
Right.
He's a white guy in power. So
there you go. That's very true. Yeah. Always attack Trump.
How do you determine what's up and what's down? They do it based on these identity groups.
They do it. They do it based on the identity groups, of course, and that's not accurate because take somebody like there's nobody in society with less power than myself. I can verify that, but it has nothing to do with that. And the reason that there isn't like you don't detect like a system or whatever is because there isn't one, and that's by design. It's whatever they say in that moment, accept it, and 2 + 2 = 5. It could equal 10. It could equal 100. We'll let you know when it happens, but you should just be careful. If they give you a framework, to work within, then it'd be like, all right, I guess if that's what, at least you can work within that. I mean, that's why YouTube keeps it so vague. That's why Twitter keeps it so vague. That's why it's so inconsistent and everything seems so hypocritical, is because, first of all, it's impossible to make these kinds of rules and have them be, sensible. But if they were sensible, then people would be able to still say what they wanted within this kind of, framework. And they don't want that either. They want everybody to be sort of vulnerable to this takedown. And I think that's why, of course it doesn't make sense. But yeah, if you're considering comedy, Carter, and you're going, well, how do I be a big success? You'll never go wrong attacking Trump, like you said, and just punch yourself in the face a lot. You know what I mean? That's a lateral punch. I guess you're punching up just by doing that. You're taking the persona of someone who's lower than you, and uppercut. And I mean, like it's the punching up, punching down thing too. It doesn't make.
I could hire like a disabled immigrant woman or like trans person to go on stage and punch me.
That's it. That's what it'll eventually come to. Yeah, these like watch the white man get punched night. You know, there'll be people in Times Square handing out flyers like, "Do you like to see white men violently mistreated?" They'll be violently mistreating white men central on cable. You know, it's really ridiculous. But that is the idea of punching down really breaks down when you look at like, okay, like, and I think I mentioned this in that article that was in New Media Central is the site where that went up, the Apatow article that you referenced. He's talking about Louis C.K. punching down, you know, and the point I made was that, you know, like, look, Louis lost everything. I mean, he lost 5 executive producer credits. He lost, you know, the show, the deal he had with FX. He lost a movie that he'd worked for years on, that he wrote and directed and edited himself, for Christ's sake. I mean, that's unheard of. That's like a monumental amount of effort and sweat and toil and thought and creativity just flushed down the toilet, which I don't know if the movie was going to be good or not, but it doesn't matter. It's like just all that put into it. I mean, he went away for 9 months. He gave up all this income. He gave up stand-up for a long time, 9 months. And then he comes back. And the first time he comes back, he's shaking off the cobwebs or something, you know, a couple of months in, and somebody records him without his knowledge. And then you bag on him, you know, while meanwhile, you know, Apatow at the time, his show is going well, whatever. He's, you know, the picture of Hollywood success. I mean, him shitting on Louis C.K. is the definition of punching down.
Yeah.
You know? And,
that's a great point.
Yeah.
Well, but this belies their real motive, which is they don't care about any of the things they profess to care about. They're just, not to like drag us down in the conversation, but I really believe that they're just Marxist authoritarians. They're like busybodies who wish that they could wield the weapon of power against anyone they dislike. And to do that, you just make everything verboten, and then you can pick and choose because everyone's always violating some rule.
Yeah.
But this is something Carter and I disagree on quite frequently. You know what I'm about to say.
There's so many good people who are just doing it. There's good stormtroopers.
No, I think there's 2 types of people though, and it's important. There's at least 2, because those who are in it with good intent and really do believe it and are true believers, those are the people that I think you can pull out of it. You can reach those people. I mean, yes, there's a huge group of them who they have bad intent and they know exactly what this ideology is, or they are using it for their own power. They don't care about ending oppression as much as they want to be the ones oppressing. But there are also those people in it who, like, I believe this was liberalism and progressivism. And I think those are the people, we do them a disservice when we lump them in with the others, because you can pull those people. I need to pull them out of the cult.
When I say they, I'm talking about the ideology, though.
I get it. Yeah, I agree.
Who's duped by it.
It is good. I've had this discussion with people before. Like, how far up do you have to go before someone gets it and has the full knowledge of what's going on? How deep within the cult is that? Like, what level of the you know, Scientologist like evolution? You know, or what step or whatever do they tell you? Like, oh no, we are obviously oppressing people. But and I think it's pretty high. And I think that even within those people, there's like you know, they fall back on, you know, their training, which is that, no, we are against racism. And that's, I mean, like they always have that as it's sort of like your favorite old band. That's how they go back to that, you know, like, you don't listen to the Ramones every day or whatever, you know, but you still, you'll hear it and think, oh yeah, that's what I actually believe. You know, there's 2 kinds of knowledge. I mean, there's like or intelligence. There's, you know, like your regular and like, but your emotional intelligence, I think, is also involved. And like, if they don't have a certain kind of self-awareness about their emotional intelligence, then they won't realize that what they're doing is like venting everything that they can't vent anywhere else on an acceptable target. They need to have this anger that is like, you know, as people, they're frustrated themselves that they have to censor themselves so much. And they blame you know, they blame whoever it is that is such a huge racist, because look, you can just take the fire hose and point it right at them all you want. You know, it is open season on them. So long as they keep saying, they close off it's like, you know, a funnel. You close off every other, you know, people that you can attack. There's no other outlet except white guys, but they are cool. Go after them all you want, you know, or whatever group that they designate. And so, this is a really, by the way, Carter, I really do find that in conversations like this, I try not to be the first one to bring up communism. So thank you.
You know what? It is communism, but I'll say the word. You said the word, but
no, when I bring it up,
hide behind that I brought up Marxism. It's fine.
No, not at all. That's not what I mean. I just mean like whenever I've brought it up, like I was talking about this a couple of years ago before Trump got elected, and it was like, this is like I saw a movie called The Enemies Within, and it was like well documented. It was a true documentary or whatever, and you're like, wow, this is like this is a real thing. Communism's real. It's just not called communism anymore. It's called it doesn't have this. Justice. Yeah, social justice doesn't really have a name. It's something you can't people could get behind like communism being bad, but how the fuck could you get behind something called social justice being bad? It has the word justice in it, and so like that's introductory level, like sort of Orwellian terminology, and that's what we have to like. It really sets the table for that kind of thought. Words like deplatforming. Mm-hmm. You mean completely shutting people up and throwing them off the internet?
Yeah, censoring. There's a word for that already.
Yeah, and you're talking about the people who are liberal and stuff like that, and they go, well. No, I'm very against censorship. Very against censorship. I just don't. No, absolutely not. How do you feel about hate speech? We must stop hate speech. We must. Well, what's hate speech? Whatever they say it is. I don't know. So they're really like just bending over for censorship, and like just welcoming this authoritarian, tyrannical sort of state, and like it's. Man, they've really figured it out. Genius. Their approach is so smart. Not to do. I mean, like they come at
language.
Like through. Yeah, it is language. Yeah, absolutely. You control language. You control thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, you're basically saying there's a bunch of self-delusion and lack of self-awareness, even by the people that could understand the ideology, but are kind of implementing it. But I guess I'm really countering to Keri, not you on this, because but I'm like, does that entitle them to forgiveness? Like, if you're murdering babies, I don't really care if it's because you're deluded or not. Like, you're still murdering babies. So as far as I'm concerned, if you're pushing for Marxist authoritarianism, I don't give a crap whether you think you're doing it for good. You're just a horrible person. And if we can save you and show you that, great. And if we can't, well, too bad. I mean, I don't know why we give them forgiveness just because they lack self-awareness.
I'm not talking about forgiveness necessarily. I'm saying the way you just said, if we can save them, great. Well, we don't save them by calling them horrible people. You're not going to get me on board with you by calling.
I'm not arguing that that's a good strategy to reach out. That's not the postcard they get in the mail, right? But we're having a discussion like philosophically here. Not this isn't a marketing campaign.
Well, you know what's funny, Carter? Pat said something to me when we were talking beforehand that you said, which was like, I can't remember how Pat phrased it, but Pat Carter has said before that I have a lot of evil to make up for because of my old.
You've
done so much damage, Keri.
Yeah, karma.
Bad karma.
I don't know. I tend to. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but I tend not to think of people as good people and bad people anymore. Just people who are capable of both, and sometimes people are really just in their bad season. Or in their good season, or and so anyway, that's a philosophical.
That's an excellent way to look at it, because like if I look back when I was my brother was talking about these kids wearing their Che Guevara shirts or whatever, and they know that he's a mass murderer, or they thought he didn't know anything. Well, the thing, no, they don't know anything, because I mean, they might know that fact or whatever, or they might know that like whoever did what, but it doesn't have any meaning to them yet if they're 22, 25. And those people, like the shit I used to say and do when I was 25, or 20 or whatever. I mean, like it was, look, I mean, I'm not any great intellect now, but I was an idiot then, and very easily swayed on anything. I didn't really like whatever. You haven't got it all figured out yet, and like it's really smart the way they've made them like sort of like like, oh, the youth are leading the charge. I mean, like you harness that energy. They always think they're changing the fucking world. I mean, like it's like you're not. So if we could somehow educate young people, you're not changing the world here. Okay, it's not happening.
Well, I mean, sometimes they are changing the world, and it results in a bloody revolution and lots of deaths, and then eventually starvation of tens of millions of people.
That's why we have to brutally censor them. Yeah. If anybody should be censored, it's young people. You know? I mean, like hardcore too. Yeah, it's really the idea, like you said, you know, like the forgiveness thing. You know, Carter, like maybe we shouldn't. You know, what they're doing is wrong. They have their awareness is such that, I mean, they're twisted up. I mean, they're encouraged not to even talk to people who you know, who believe different things or whatever, you know. And if you get more than 3 questions into some kind of philosophical discussion with them, they just go, you know what, I can't even, you know.
Oh, is that your AOC impression? Someone correctly.
I would be shaking a rattle and wearing a diaper if I was doing my AOC impression. You know, she auditioned. She's an actress, you know. I mean,
I saw the was it Reagan? Who was it?
Yeah.
Who did that?
Yeah, right.
Awesome.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
She auditioned for what?
The role of congresswoman. Yeah,
really?
she auditioned to be the one that they ran. I mean, and there's like a couple of other of the Congress people who went through a similar process. Regina Tlaib, I guess. She's in Michigan, I think. Yeah, they are complete actors.
Wow.
Yeah. And you know that's because she's 29 and she knows anything about politics. It's complete nonsense, you know. And
well, I mean, in fairness, she knows as much as Bernie Sanders seems to.
Hey,
well, hey. Bernie knows how to say the right things. He's just a few years too late, you know.
I voted for Bernie, by the way.
Excellent.
So you got to make up for that too.
Yeah, I got to make up for that.
No, I that's an excellently cast vote. Just waste it. You know. I always encourage the left, vote all this third-party bullshit.
Yeah, Jill Stein.
Yeah, she has a chance. Yeah, it's so ridiculous. I love this conversation. The idea that like people are so like when you said that that some people are not aware of it, you know, and Carter, you said also, you know, that like it doesn't really matter if they're not aware of it and everything, but it is absolutely required of the philosophy to not be aware of all this stuff. You know what I mean? It's absolutely required for them to like have all this. I can never remember the term for having to the cognitive dissonance. You know, required. You know, they have to, in order to stomach that. They really have to. You know, not look closely at it at all. Self-delusion is an absolute must, and they will cling to that with every, you know, bit of who they are, because like they're so connected to the idea that they are this like racism fighting, fascism fighting machine that they cannot. So you can't take that away from them without taking their sense of self,
their identity. Yes,
their identity. Right.
You really hit upon it. It becomes part of who you are, and you define yourself by it. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that in my case, I was undergoing like a really hard time in my life, personally trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted. And then that everything was raised to the ground, you know? So then you're building up your whole identity again. And it kind of, those things went hand in hand, like losing my ideology, which was like my religion and my identity. It went hand in hand with this personal changes, you know, these personal things that were happening. I have another question for you that might be interesting. A lot of times on this podcast, we've talked about SJW ideology and overlap with mental health issues, or the way that it seems to encourage people to embrace their mental health issues, or to even identify as their
advertise and brag about such mental health issues. Even.
Yeah. And so I know you and I both have a history with people with borderline personality. You have the whole joke about your ex-girlfriend. Did I call her girlfriend? Was she a girlfriend?
Yeah. She was a girl. Yeah, sure. She was an ex-girlfriend by then, but when she was a problem.
And so I've often thought of it as sort of a collective borderline personality disorder. Do you see any kind of analogy there to
I mean, it's a natural point in the conversation for that, since like it requires so little self-awareness to be in this cult. Then I guess it stands to reason that if you sort of like have all this, you know, you're almost teaching people to be some kind of dissociative person, aren't you? You know, like so somebody who can like compartmentalize to a strangely to an unhealthy degree, And I guess like you're manufacturing, what would that be? I'm not really familiar with psychology that much, like a sociopath or something, you know, an emotionless, you know, kind of, you know, person. But I never really thought about that they're being trained to be maniacs and to be out with it like that. It's terrifying. And I guess that's another reason to do it. Like now that like they have a lot of sway, they can just go, oh, by the way, we're insane. You know? Scary thought. Yeah.
Well, I think because borderline personality is it's like a disorder of the emotions, and they are so about emotion over fact. And your emotion is all the evidence needed. If you feel a certain way, that's your lived experience. It's what?
Right? Like it's a solipsist disorder as well. Like it's there doesn't seem to like people, because I had a ex-girlfriend's mom actually that had borderline personality disorder, but like there's like the entire world consists of their how it affects them. That's the totality of what matters in the world. There's like a lack of caring for how, or even maybe awareness of the like other people exist actually and are affected in their own ways. It's all about like how what's like, it's the world is just my neural inputs, and that's the end of it.
Yeah. Wow. That's a scary person to deal with too. By the way, well done on her being an ex-girlfriend, you know, because like that she was going to be trouble with she had a severely borderline mother. Oh my Christ. I mean, they didn't even diagnose stuff like that a while back. I mean, there's no telling how long shit like that's been going on. It's such a dangerous and weird disorder. And you're right. They don't have any kind of care for, like, they'll speak of themselves as the victims.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
And white people really, you know, are the worst, you know, and that's the only time I'll say that, in that they really are like, they see, all these communities and groups being able to attract all this sympathy and get the currency of being a victim, which I don't understand exactly why this has so much currency, but it's associated with like nobility and strength and overcoming and coming forward and being bold or whatever it is, you know, but you're the victim is praised all the time. And so like white people are like, well, wait a second, I want to be a victim too, you know? And so they will actually own all this, you know, like we live in a society that's so, and they think they have to white knight for everybody and everything and get involved. And so, yeah, I guess that there's evidence of what you're saying in that, you know, because Carter, because, you know, they're looking at they're taking themselves as the victim of oppression and racism or something, playing that role by, you know, this kind of like hypersensitive, you know, acting on it and perception of it. I found
they're almost like volunteering to be offended on behalf of other people who maybe couldn't give a shit what was going on, but like, well, as a white person, you shouldn't say that. Like, I'll be the one to step in and
on
throw
behalf
myself
of
in
color.
On behalf of this person of color.
And could there be anything more racist or presumptuous
right,
than
exactly.
that?
Yeah.
These people are too stupid to talk to themselves.
Yes.
Hold on. Stand back, Glass. I've got this.
But you've just described like most of white liberals, at least in the Bay Area, like that's how they operate.
Yeah. Yeah. And once you have them advocating for, you know, everything that's wrong ever, you know, Jesus, right? And then you win, right? It's terrible.
You know, I don't know how far into the SJW rabbit hole you've been, but you know what the reason they say they do this, Pat, is because it's emotional labor for women and people of color or any oppressed person to have to defend their arguments or explain things.
Right.
So it's the job of the privileged ally to come in and do it.
And we all know how much they hate work, right?
I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking like I could make a joke about this, but I don't know if I'm comfortable.
Well, if you're not comfortable, then you're about to poison the king, and you can't poison the king. You have to shoot the king. So, having said inappropriate things a number of times, I've learned. But yeah, it's so true though. The emotional labor thing. What the hell is that? You know, like that's a big one for women too, isn't it? Like the emotional labor of being a woman. Which is like, it used to be just like shit you'd say over a fence, you know, to the neighbor. Like, I ironed every one of his shirts. And, you know, it's It gets to be taxing on me mentally. You know what I mean?
Heavy my
talking
martini.
To you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You have a couple of drinks and go on with your fucking life. You know.
There's a group, Pat. If you haven't seen it, it's called oh God, what is it, Carter? It's a group of it's called White Nonsense Roundup. And it's a Facebook group of white people, and they come in and they round up other white people so that people of color don't have to do the emotional labor. So you can tag them on Facebook and they'll come in and they'll preach about our shared white privilege and all those. Anyway, they're white people who go and do exactly what we're talking about, who go in and speak on behalf of people of color.
I love that so much, man. And as somebody, like, I know quite a few black people who say, yeah, we don't really like that. I don't like that. You know, I mean, like, I find that and you can see why they would be so, that's why they didn't vote for Hillary, you know, because
it's
like
condescending.
Yeah, she's extremely condescending. I'm going to bring you into the 21st century. You know, I'm going to what? Everything's it's just weird, you know. All this belief.
That's how I feel about the voter. That's how I feel about the voter registration laws, where there's like black people can't go to the you can't require them to like go register to vote and have an ID because black people don't have IDs. It's like what. In what world do they live where black people are so incompetent that they can't go register to vote with a fucking ID like everyone else? I've never met anyone like that, but apparently that's the view of any racial minority.
They get a letter and then they just set it on fire for warmth and stuff. You know, they're bumping into walls. How do I vote? Are there mean white people there? Yeah, it's so true.
That does happen with women too. I love one of my things I find the most funny is when I'm arguing in a online or something and a woke male feminist joins the discussion because when you can use that stuff
those are the real sex offenders.
Oh, they're creepy. I know they do. Yeah. There seem to be a lot of them who turn out to be actual harassers or
because the intent makes it all okay.
Yeah.
Like, I don't intend to hurt you. I just really want to have sex with you. Yeah. And they think, well, they're on the right team. So that's probably why they take liberties like that.
Oh, yeah.
Sexual harassers and sexual offenders. Yeah.
And they're like, I have the right politics. It's like Harvey Weinstein when he his letter that he released right after the first New York Times piece. He released a letter that's like, yeah, I may have done some inappropriate things. That's why I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to fighting the NRA and getting guns off. That was in his letter. It was like, this is so weird. He's trying to remind us, but I'm on the right team, guys. Like I've got the right politics. I'm a good person.
As if the NRA has anything to do with what he was doing. You know, right. I mean, like,
they kind of do. Wait. No, they kind of do. In that, I used to train civilians in concealed carry so they could get concealed carry permits. And quite a few of them were women who had been sexually assaulted in the past and wanted to carry a weapon around in self-defense. Mm-hmm. So there's a relation. It's just not the one that...
He's trying to get the guns out of their hands, right?
Yeah,
exactly. You
never know when one of these ladies might be packing, so we need to get rid of guns, you know? It's so crazy. One of the things he supposedly did was forced someone to give him oral sex. I guess that's probably alleged multiple times, but it was one complaint that I heard, and I thought, I just don't think that, I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible. I mean, there's prison, you know, and there's certain things, but I mean, you have to to force a person, physically force a person to give you oral sex. I don't understand how that could last more than a second. I'm saying, I know that they're weaker. I know I get power and all that stuff, and I'm not saying it's right. I'm not on his side, but I'm just trying to imagine, how
that happens.
I think every once in a while somebody blows somebody and goes, I didn't want to do that. You know?
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I actually agree. So I didn't see enough people talking about this or enough women talking about it, but like the Ashley Judd story with him, there are a lot of those women who you're making a deal with the devil. Now, it's not right that he's offering you this deal. Hold on, let me get my doggy.
Right when you mentioned the devil.
Well, so this is what they do. They conflate. So they use the word force differently than I think you and I would use the word force. To me, force means physical, actual force. But people use the word force, especially on the left now. They use the force to mean like gave me a choice that I didn't like, or
like he had power,
intimidated me verbally somehow, or like
he had power,
and that is coercion and bad, but it's not force.
No, it's not force. No, yeah, and so to say force is inaccurate.
So him abusing his power is absolutely inappropriate, and it happens too often. But a lot of those women, they went along with it. It's like they chose to do that to make, and there was, I think this was really illustrated in the story of one of the women who didn't. It's her name is Lupita. I can't remember her last name. She's a black actress.
See, we don't know her name because
the great actress Lupita somebody. Yes, of course.
Oh no, well she was in. I think she was in 12 Years a Slave. Anyway, she said no to him, and he was like, "You'll never work, and you'll never have." And she said no, and went on to be in an Oscar-nominated film. I mean, that woman had balls, and she actually did not do a forced blowjob. She left. Do you know what I mean?
So it goes to show that, like, you can still be successful if you're good. She's obviously, maybe she's very talented. I guess that's the narrative when you talk about these poor victims like Ashley Judd, who, somehow, in spite of the fact that they were, forced to have sex with somebody, still manage to fight against that, and become successful, I guess is what, you're to believe, when actually, of course you accept, whatever the guy has to offer. Otherwise, why would you have done it to begin with? It's not as if they took the easier path, and that should be acknowledged. It really should. And it should weigh into everything that they say about it and make it suspect. But at the same time, the reason you didn't hear a lot about that is because, it's not really the story we're telling here, is it? Well,
not to minimize, I get that they're quote victims in the sense that they took the easy path, and they were subject to this coercion, and it was bad. But they also didn't say anything to anyone, and they should have been, right? They also didn't say anything, and a lot of people didn't say anything. So all those people that were silent, like, why do we not care about them? They enabled this to continue. Someone just had to say, the guy tried to make him a blowjob. I had my iPhone there. I recorded the audio. Here it is. Done.
What are you, classic victim blaming now, Carter?
Yes, I am victim blaming. I'm such an asshole.
Once you're a victim, you are blameless in the situation, and that's why they're so quick to label somebody as a victim, because it makes them invulnerable to critique. So, I when I used the word before victim in reference to Ashley Judd, I was being ironic, so I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. Well, they pretend like women have no agency. It's like that you can't just say, and in some cases maybe they couldn't have left the room, or what have you, but there are times when you can walk out and leave. It's like the girl who wrote, did you read the piece, Pat, about Aziz Ansari?
Yeah, I just was thinking of it when you mentioned it. That's what I thought. Yeah. And
she had regrettable sex with him. She chose to.
The definition of someone who has who has zero agency in anything, and like they really encourage that, and I guess it's because they want the whole power, the whole weight of everything to crash down on somebody, in response to something like that. It's I guess it's encouraged for that reason. Otherwise, you think that they would be really for the power of the woman, but like even when he ordered wine. Yeah. He ordered the wine, and she starts off saying, well, he ordered red, I wanted white. Why didn't you mention it, you dumb bitch? I mean, like, it's you have to learn to say things you want, he's not a mind reader. Like, talk about, like, I have zero control over any of this stuff. No, the waiter's right there, I mean, it's such a strange thing.
It's so condescending, though, and as I'm the dad of a daughter, and as she's growing up, it's like it's the worst possible role model to give her. It's like it's this idea that, like, oh, you'll never have any agency, so everything just happens to you. But that's kind of the quote feminism that we have now today. I don't understand it.
Yeah, it is, and because it's a feminism that's all about advocacy and control. I guess, and it's not really about feminism anymore. This wave of feminism really has it's almost like it's a huge step back, except it's a step forward in power, but it's a step back in the rest of it. I think that you're right to teach your daughter about that. I'm glad somebody's teaching their daughter something. I'm glad that some dad is talking to his daughter. I mean, you might raise someone who's not on the pole, right? I mean, that's the idea. which is that they really confuse you with all this stuff, you know, like, oh wait, okay, so if a woman is a stripper, then she's owning her sexuality and she's using it to, but if I go to that strip club, I'm a degenerate dirtbag who is supporting the, you know, mistreatment of women. You know, it's like you cannot win. So, you know, as we go through and always point out all these, like, you know, ridiculous points of hypocrisy and everything, it's so, you know, like we raise it like it's an argument or something, you know, and it's funny because like there's no counter to it, you know, except that we're all racists and we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, you know. I mean, like, it's everything's a nuke. So like it would be great. What we're fighting, I think, is another like arc back, you know, that I don't know how to win hearts and minds when they've freely given them away to this very tempting kind of victimization culture and stuff. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's, when you put it that way, it gets kind of depressing to think about the future, right? Because these, you know, you're about my age, and like schools, when we grew up, schools were, not that they were great, but they weren't as horrible as they are now. And I feel like they've just destroyed kids' ability to critically think. And they've indoctrinated, colleges have, for the most part, indoctrinated them into this ideology. And these are the kids that are going to be running the country in a few decades. And you know, I think it's very likely to be either a civil war or a Marxist regime of some kind, whether it's the feminists or the social justice warriors, or whoever wins the battle and holds the reign of power. The most evil and violent and despicable person always rises to the top in those situations. So that's what we'll have. Yeah,
and isn't it a fact that like we're different? People like us, so we have to think with our own individual brains. We're not joiners per se, so it's hard to mobilize for a civil war. And I think one by one, we'll all just like, you know, make our peace with all this. You know, that like, yeah, I guess whatever you say, I'll be quiet. But you know, like, you notice how I think that's a really important personality difference between the left and the right. The left loves to show up for protests, and they love to chant, you know, and they love to agree, and they love to, you know, all be saying the same thing regardless, without having to give it a lot of thought. Yeah, we have, yeah, perhaps businesses that we need to run, you know, things we want to do with our lives, and like we don't have any importance on that because we don't see these things as the issue that they see them as. So we're not emotionally driven to do that. And what would it take to mobilize all the people who think the way we think? Donald Trump is one thing that it took, you know. I mean, like, that's why everybody was like, so yes, somebody is like pushing back against this shit at all. And it's like, once you kind of like have that in your corner, I mean, that's why people are so fanatical about Trump, is because to them, he doesn't seem like the problem. He seems like the solution. But about the, you know, being depressed, you know what? I've gone through that, and I guess I can empathize. So, I mean, the only thing that I can offer is to say, like, you know what, in 30, 40 years max, we're going to be dead. And so now we have some gratitude for that, you know. I thank God.
Yeah, but I have a kid. I have a child. Our kids aren't going to be dead.
But right? You'll be dead.
I'll probably be dead before then. The way
you won't be able to care, you know. I mean, like, and it's too bad though. I don't have any kids, and I kind of, it would be interesting to see how my kids would be reacting to this, just as it would be interesting to see how Patrice O'Neill would be reacting to all this. I mean, like, we lost him. He was such a great voice against this kind of thing. Or,
so
you know, Greg Giraldo, you know, or, you know, like some of these guys who like really, you know, they're really missed. And I think it's really important. The voices in comedy are maybe more important now because, you know, when we get depressed about it, it's the laughter really that saves you. You know what I mean? The fact that like we can sit and have some laughs about this is like really the only way to. I think that's why they're attacking comedy, is because it's the only way out. It's the only solution, and it's really, humor is the only weapon because it has truth in it that is inarguable.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I think it's a spiritual like respite from all the crap, right? You just like take a few moments and listen to a comedian who lets you laugh about the stuff that we're laughing about, and it's a release. Sorry, Keri, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, I was going to say, well, to that point, I wanted to ask you, Pat, who are some, like, who makes you laugh lately? Like, who are some of your favorites lately, if you don't mind?
I'm not the comedy fan I once was. In a sense, I mean, but like, these days, like, yeah, I mean, you've probably heard comedians all say this since you manage comedians, but we tend to not watch them, anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I can't stand to see who's on stage before me, even because if he's getting big laughs, then I'm just instantly angry that he's up there getting my laughs, And if there's someone the idea of somebody being somebody that you respect and admire, so you avoid their stuff, Apatow said some bullshit like that about Louis C.K. as if he could ever be barking up the same tree as one of the best comedy minds ever, and one of definitely one of the foremost of his generation in this time. Yeah, I think Louis C.K. makes me laugh all the time. I think he's a very, very, very funny guy. And like the stuff he was saying, people loved laughing at that stuff because he was talking about the victims of, the school shooting or whatever down in Parkland. And like, he wasn't talking about him like in a mean or angry way or anything like that. Like but it was a frustrated thing. Like how they've been made these media celebrities. Why should I find them interesting? And if you heard the bit, but like people loved it because this is what they've been waiting to hear. They were responding to him, and trust me, I'm not trying to draw on a line here between the two, but in the same way as Carter and I were just talking about, the way they responded to Trump, it's like he's the guy with water and you're in the desert.
Yeah.
You don't hear that stuff. And so to me, anybody who's talking about the stuff that you're not supposed to be talking about, I think Milo is funny.
Milo is funny.
Gavin McInnes to me is instantly entertaining anytime he's talking. I just find him to be like just an intrinsically entertaining guy. I've never seen him on a show that he didn't dress up.
So side note about Gavin, for anyone watching, I told you this before the show, Pat, but I was on his show before it left CRTV. He did a special about people who had walked away from the left, and I didn't know much about him at the time. I knew his name, but everything, I'm sure in the SJW echo chamber, everything about him is like, oh, don't go to a show. He's a white nationalist, and the Proud Boys are white nationalists, and I had friends concerned for me of like, I don't know, even if he's not, he's been tarred with that label, and you don't want to go on there and be tarred with. See, that's what they do is they make people radioactive, and then you can't associate with them. So yeah, and so I started looking him up and talked to some friends who gave me some background on him, and everything I looked at told me that official story they're putting out in the media is fucking bullshit. Sorry again for the language, is not true. And so I went on the show, and you can also, it's what you talked about earlier in the discussion about watching a comedian and sort of doing a gut check on when they're doing a joke that might be deemed offensive, on whether if they're truly malicious or not. And just like within meeting him, within a few minutes, I was like, oh, this guy doesn't have a racist bone in his body. He's not a racist. Like, he's part comedian, which they forget.
Yeah.
Like they forget that he's a comic. Right.
He dresses up like Michael Douglas from Falling Down for a lot of this stuff. You interviewed him at one point, Pat, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a friend of Gavin's, and he's been on New York City Crime Report a couple of times, and those episodes do really well, by the way. So, I mean, I know there's an audience out there for him and for what he's doing. He's the first time I heard of him was he did a show called Free Speech, and it was on a different network, and I was like, seeing that he was charting or whatever, and I was like doing my own show at the time, trying to figure out like what are people doing that I'm not doing or whatever. And I listened to his show, and he was actually saying facts and pushing back on like just like social justice stuff. He was being funny, and he was like making me laugh, and he was lighthearted, and he's like, just like his approach was just perfectly honest and perfectly straightforward and perfectly funny and charming and everything. Like, I mean, I'm not here to like boost this jerk who hardly needs my boosting, But he said, he
Show
and
us
I
your
are
shirt
like,
again.
Yeah. Well, he and I are. This was it's laundry day. This was one of those free ones. But it's we're exactly the same age, he and I, to the month. And we have like a lot of like common sort of like, just like, just, it is. Sometimes you just have like, you see everything kind of like in a real similar way. And to see him demonized, I mean, that's how you know that like he was really kind of becoming more popular in the mainstream. And like it's really kind of these days an easy sell to go like, hey, look, a bunch of people having fun who don't worry about this shit so much. Like, it sounds great, you know? I mean, so those people have to be the most dangerous white supremacists ever. That's why they came out so hard against him, you know? I mean, there were videos of like some of these guys beating up members of Antifa. But yeah, keep in mind, Antifa is the militant tactical wing of, you know, the leftist authoritarian system or whatever. They're not like blameless protectors out there. If they,
they're overtly violent. They have, there's no, you don't need to read between the lines with Antifa. They're just like, yeah, we're violent. That's what we're going to do. We're going to violently overthrow.
Yeah, but the mainstream media carries water for them. I mean, CNN was talking about, you know, some punches are justified. Like they did this whole thing about Antifa being, you know, they were doing what we talked about earlier, defending violence because it's in the name of anti-fascism.
Yeah, and so many times you read articles about them and they say a group of anti-fascists. They don't say, you know, Antifa, a group of mass thugs, a group of black bloc, you know, tactically trained college professors and reporters, which that's who a lot of them are. They're, you know, involved in universities and there was one guy who was arrested for punching a guy. They beat up a veteran who was a Hispanic guy who had been in the Marines. They beat him up and they used all kind of slurs and stuff like that. And this guy was advising on policy in the Democrat Party. You know, it's unreal how little this stuff gets publicized and how, just imagine how much it would be publicized. You know, somebody raised a hand to his wife or something, instantly fired and all that kind of stuff. You know, if it's on the other side, this is a guy who is out doing hate crime, apparently. And it's just, well, we'll look the other way on that. Yeah, you think you don't have to read between the lines, but you know something? They have somehow introduced subtlety into this. I don't understand. They're allergic to nuance until it helps them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I read the Antifa handbook. I mean, they're pretty clear. Their definition of fascism, which I've said on the show before, and they're clear about this. Anything that's not socialism, if it's not Marxism, it's fascism. That's their definition. So... Yeah. And they're very clear about like using force. So
yeah, I know. And yet the media and any politicians who side with them on that, you know, are very, very happy to be apologists and to find all these shades of gray in it, you know, and to say, yeah, but at least they're not the Proud Boys, that racist bunch of it. They're against them. So I guess in this situation, hard to say really who's to blame, but it's the Proud Boys. You know, this idea of like hearing about, when you mentioned it before, like people who are just picking up like a thread of it someplace, who aren't really like online experiencing this, you know, the way some of us do, which is really unhealthy, by the way, for us to do that. We should be more like these people who don't even know what's going on. I don't mean to say it.
Fight.
I don't mean to say it that way, but yeah. But this one of the guys who one of the Proud Boys who was involved in this altercation back in October with Antifa, the ones, I mean, they got charged for this stuff. They got a couple of felony charges, 9 guys. Okay. I don't know if you knew about this. It was the Republican clubhouse or whatever.
Yeah.
Antifa made threats. They vandalized the place. They broke the lock. They put, you know, they spray painted symbols and stuff like that. They broke a window. They had been doing this before McInnes like even showed up to talk. Yeah. Leading up to. Before. So then when they're there, and they steal a guy's backpack and they and steal his hat, and they're trying to get it back, these Proud Boys are, and then they get seen on video kicking a couple of them. They end up being charged, and I mean, no victim came forward. No, there was no complainant, you know, because if they did that, they'd have to have their identity out, and the political pressure was so great based on, you know, the big push, the groundswell. I mean, even the governor got involved, the AG got involved, the mayor, everybody has to weigh in about these terrible people. And I happened to speak to one of the, you know, the parent of one of these kids, you know, who was involved. Wow. Kids, I mean, he's in his 20s or whatever, and right. and he's looking at me like, what is going on? You know, I don't even understand this. This is some minor skirmish. My kid might do 5 years on this, and it was just to defend their own property.
Yeah, it's. I don't think people realize how overblown it is, like the news about them is, and how they've been targeted. They, I don't know if you saw this, Pat, but after that skirmish that got blown out of proportion, like a lot of the Proud Boys are Black and Hispanic, and one of the guys who's was facing charges. Like they were trying to raise money for his legal defense, and his wife is black and his kids are black. And so and then you started seeing articles from SJWs where they literally called them, the Proud Boys are a multiracial white supremacist group.
Yeah. That's like, very Orwellian, eh? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, hold those thoughts in your mind at the same time.
Right.
We accept anybody so long as you're white supremacist.
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, lunacy. And I wonder if they were like, whoever the editor was who made that call was like, let's just see what happens. See if they buy it.
They did.
Of course.
They bought it.
Yeah. Just give us an explanation. It doesn't have to be right. It doesn't have to make any sense. Just a bunch of letters, really. Put them together and we'll say that. It doesn't even have to be words. That's the answer? Okay. And when you need no substance to your argument at all, it doesn't really matter. And so, yeah, now we have multiracial white supremacist groups.
Who were then kicked off of Twitter, by the way, and Antifa's still on Twitter. Tim Pool brought that up in the Joe Rogan podcast recently. Like, that's
crazy.
A lot of those Proud Boys were kicked off of Twitter.
Almost all of them, and his groups, they were all kicked off, and that was all done summarily before all this occurred. You know, that was done as a. I guess they were trying to. I'm not exactly sure. It was right before the Unite the Right anniversary, and so they were somehow trying to connect those two things. Like, well, you know, in the lead up to Unite the Right, they were kicked off Twitter, but like the second one, the anniversary or whatever. That was not advocated by McInnes at all. He told all the Proud Boys, do not go to that.
Right.
Specifically, don't go to Charlottesville. If you do, you're not a Proud Boy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just documented all over the place, and I'm sure that he'll be bringing that up in his lawsuit against the SPLC. But they got. I think the reason that they get kicked off, targeted, and stuff like that is because it was really starting to grow, and it was really starting to become something that, like, it's hard to believe. I saw him talking about this with the stupid wuss virgin tech guy. You know, that's kind of why he started it. It was in response to this kid being like, well, no, I don't. I've never had sex and I'll do it whenever. I don't care. You know, and he was like, what are you talking about? You know, look at the way you live. You know, he just wanted to counteract all this like sort of defeatist beta thinking. And he made something kind of fun, you know, and it's the most silly, harmless thing. But, you know, it's something that I guess there was a real demand for. And somehow that all became politicized when it has nothing to do with politics, really. You can be a liberal and be it's had nothing to do with it. I don't even know if they exist anymore. I guess they do. The Proud Boys.
But it was trying to offer a positive kind of masculinity, and masculinity is toxic. You can't celebrate masculinity, and you certainly can't celebrate Western civilization or Western.
I was going to say they use that toxic phrase, Western civilization.
Yeah, so
it really goes to the heart of what they are all about, doesn't it? I mean, like getting rid of Western. That's really why Gavin did hit a bullseye on the whole Western culture thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the masculinity you're talking about is not really masculine. You know, I mean, the masculinity they're trying to encourage is this like kind of, I don't know, like second guessing sort of like, what does she want kind of deal. You know what I mean? I mean, anytime something's reactive, it's and when you're putting your nature in subordination to a reaction to some female, you know, or some advocates of females or whatever, you know, clearly that's not masculinity. That's, you know, you're just taking your orders or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't think women like that, really. I see these very dissatisfied women, you know, who are in the park. I'll see these guys, like, especially in Brooklyn, you know, these guys who have like a baby carrier, you know, and they're bespectacled, balding, a little bit of facial hair, and they look really earnest or whatever. And they'll have the most angry woman with them who's glaring around through her horn-rimmed glasses because she needs to get fucked, right? You know,
and she probably is sleeping with some like biker dude on the side. Yeah,
right. Yeah, somebody a little more, you know, got a little bit of spark. Toxic, a little exciting.
Yeah, someone toxic, exactly.
So, Carter, do you think that labeling all the masculinity toxic, combined with trying to take away guns, combining with demonizing, you know, white people in general as the patriarchal oppressors, do you think that all plays in together? Is this the Marxist thing to make us a more placid and defeatable kind of a country?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because you know, you can't have, look, the fact is, male aggression, which is part of masculinity, is a necessary requirement for any kind of resistance. And it's, frankly, it was necessary for building Western civilization. So, you know, you've got to get rid of that. And their view is, you know, they think a matriarchy would be this, you know, blissful ideal. Whereas, you know, the matriarchy really means it's a matriarchy for a few years. And then, frankly, the imams take over and we're back to square one. I mean, that's what a matriarchy is.
Yeah, we're not only, it's like you're talking square one civilization wise, right?
Yeah. We don't oppose anything. We like, okay, fine, and like, great. So, you know, the worst people on the planet take over. Because look, you can't eradicate masculinity. If you eradicate the good guys, the males in Western civilization are, by and large, they use their aggression for the betterment of women and civilization generally. But if you eradicate them, guess who the hell's going to come in? There are some really toxic, horrible guys out there in the world, and they're going to take over.
If you outlaw masculinity, then only outlaws will be masculine.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
It's true. I guess that's the whole idea.
Yeah. So, you know, and there is no respect. You can see it. There's no respect for any of the good things that masculinity has brought to Western civilization. And there's this kind of, you can also see it in why they don't criticize Islam or radical Islam at all, right? They're very careful to not say anything negative about the Islamic world. And the fact is, in terms of aggression, you know, they're dialed up to 11. And you know, they don't give a crap about feminism. And
you don't get much more toxic than cutting the clitoris off of a 12-year-old girl, right?
No, or Muhammad's wife was 9. Like, come on. This is not.
See, isn't this brilliant, though, how they've engineered this belief system? Because they set it up so that you can't, if you're a true believer SJW, there's all these rules that are introduced to you, and they're introduced slowly, at least in my case they were, and you can't criticize radical Islam. It's Islamophobic. So they completely cut off your frame of vision to where you don't even acknowledge when things like that are happening, like the general mutilation.
Can you imagine? I imagine SJWs like these waiters who are carrying trays and trying to balance all these dishes and stuff, and eventually, you know, they fall. But you know, they'll be propped up by all their friends and everything. It doesn't make any sense to go, no, you cannot criticize Islam because it's you know, wrong. It's Islamophobic to do that. And that's their culture. You know what I mean? Our gripe is not with the Islamists. It's with the white patriarchs. And by the way, we have much more, all the terrorism in the country is done by white people and white men. It's like, why? That's a statistic? I don't know. How do you define that? It's ridiculous. But they can't have us criticizing Islam
everything I read in BuzzFeed, I just count up those articles. So.
Oh, right. BuzzFeed. Yes. they're infallible. I mean, they are. BuzzFeed might never be right. You know, that might be their thing. Like, you know what? You know, it's really a telling thing when you said before that, like, how many more Nazis there are now, and how, like, you know, they're so quick to call people that, because, like, if there's one thing that they have as a tactic, it's to accuse other people of doing what they're doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
They are massive.
So much projection.
Projection.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so,
and they're calling people. Go ahead.
Just that they are actual Nazis.
Yeah, they call people Nazis while behaving like them, while supporting censorship, and it's like, do you not realize that your words don't match your actions? I mean, what would it be like if we all have started trying to do this in the past couple of years, is to make sure that my actions, as best I can, reflect my beliefs. And that's a way to keep myself in check, so that I don't engage in the bad behavior I'm perfectly capable of as human. So, but people don't do that. Or at least when I was in the SJW ideology, there's no focus on, it's all about the external. There's something wrong with all of the world, but there's no solutions internally. It's all about fixing the world, but not about, like, how do I keep myself, like, how do I make sure I have integrity and I'm not, They don't see it.
That's an important part of the philosophy, because like you as an individual don't even matter, you know. So that's why they can live with that, because they've been trained to believe that, like, well, what I think and believe and do, for that matter, it doesn't really matter. What's important is the groups and society as a whole, and thinking on this level that you can never change, really. You know what I mean? Like, you can't get rid of masculinity. You can't even get rid of something like racism, although people can be trained to behave better, and they have, you know, I think over the decades. So like, once you get that individual, that concern for them out of them, it's like, not only does it help them, you know, to like project outward or whatever, but it keeps them, they don't have to ever look at themselves, which is another part of the addiction, I think, is because like, this is a philosophy that means you don't ever have to question yourself, so long as you're being sufficiently critical of everybody else.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And I would say so I would say that's the psychology of the philosophy is, you know, never do any introspection or be self-critical. And I think the philosophical goal is just, frankly, I think it's just nihilism, because, you know, we can talk about what they kind of want, but I don't think they want anything in particular other than the destruction of Western civilization. And philosophically, that just means the destruction of the Enlightenment values, which are individualism, right? And freedom from oppression, like freedom from the state, basically. And as long as that dies, I don't really think they care which particular brand of authoritarianism rules them, as long as they, you know, they think they'll be in power, I guess. But that's what it is. It's an attack on the Enlightenment values. And that's why I don't even think this is a political war. This is a philosophical or cultural war.
Yeah, and it's one that like, even some of the people who are the most active, you know, fighters in it are not aware that they're in. You know, it's like it's a really strange thing, the way they've hijacked people's brains, and they have like a bunch of Manchurian candidates or whatever, or like you know, they're Kool-Aid drinkers, all of them, you know. And some of them are like really good at drinking Kool-Aid, you know, and like damning other people in the process. It's like they figure like, if hey, belief is good enough for me to but you know what, actually, to temper that praise a little bit, it's not a particularly hard philosophy to master.
No, it's enabling you. It's like a broken child with psychological trauma. It's just saying you don't have to deal with your trauma. Blame everyone else. It's a like view of the world.
Yeah, it's like training these like broken kids to go fight in a pit bull ring. You know, that's the only thing that gives your life meaning. This is it. I guess there must be a couple people at the top who are going to be counting money at the end of this whole thing. That's not clear.
I don't know. Have you ever seen the Yuri Bezmenov stuff?
Oh yeah, I have. The dissident, right? He defected.
Yeah, and he laid out the plan that the Soviet Union used to use, and his point was, all these people who help bring about the destruction of the culture and who think they're going to be in charge, counting the money at the end of the day, they're the first people that get executed when the actual Marxists come in, because we don't
when the actual revolution happens.
Yeah, we don't need people who actually like, you know, try and make change. They're a pain in the ass. So
idealists be damned.
So the true believers, I think we talked about this, the true believers, like I was, the people who are in it because they really believe they're doing good, and get out of it, because you're the first to get the bullet.
Yeah, I mean, well, to them it looks like they're being eaten last, because all those people that they hated, you know, are already gone. So long as I think they just want to make it into the, you know, that great utopia that will be, you know, as soon as all of us shut up and die. I like the people. Nobody's going to be counting. Maybe you're right. Yeah, but that Yuri guy, what was his last name again?
Bezmenov.
Yeah, the one who defected, and he was talking about the 4 steps. And the first step is demoralization, which is such a really appropriate term for what's been going on. And this was in the 80s when he was saying this on Canadian TV, and he goes, yeah, stage 1, demoralization, and that is nearing completion, you know, and that was 30 years ago, you know. So it's taken people a long time to even begin to catch on to this stuff, because talking about communism and all this crap is what we did back in the Rambo days. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, we beat that, right? But it makes you feel like I don't know. Sometimes I feel like a weird conspiracy theorist if I start talking about communism, and it's like I don't actually think that there's communists out there doing this now. I mean,
or at least not self-identified. This isn't coming from a communist party somewhere. It's just this philosophy did not go away. Yeah, the Soviet Union collapsed, but we haven't defeated the philosophy by any means. It never left academia. It just got relabeled and rebranded, and we're still dealing with it, which is why we have censorship of comedy, which is why we're having this discussion.
Yeah, and that's why. But you will notice though, like you said, the philosophy is the important part. It hasn't changed. It just doesn't really have a name, and it comes in social justice here because they brand it for the people they're selling it to. Like they can go ahead and say communism in Venezuela or something, maybe, or whatever their party is. I mean, like they. But here they have to sell it as something caring. It has to be something that is, oh my God, just so emotionally, because they know how we are. We're basket cases over here filled with guilt and filled with like all this emotional baggage, and they use that. It's brilliant. That is the way to attack us through our hearts.
Through your compassion.
Yeah, and using your compassion against you is something borderline people do very well.
Yes.
It's totally manipulative, and you're right. It is. They do use it very well. The thing that bothers me the most, and I think the thing that I wish, if I could red pill people on like one small thing, it would be the idea that your compassion needs to be divorced from your reason. Because I think, frankly, I'm a minimalist. The government, I want the smallest government possible. I think that's a more compassionate position. But it's, if you just have compassion only in the moment, and you divorce it from your ability to like think long term and actually use reason to think about the consequences and the principles behind things, you implement things that actually are not compassionate at all. So it's this inversion of the idea of compassion. It's like, well, you're compassionate only if you pretend that, we don't, only if you suspend reason, suspend long-term thought, planning, suspend any kind of philosophical principles. Only then are you compassionate. Only if it's like a whimsical in the moment decision to make someone feel good and appease them right now by giving them more heroin. That's the only thing that's compassionate.
And in a way, though, what you're saying is that like they have successfully divorced compassion and intellect, by making one completely. They don't use their intellect to inform their compassion at all. To go like, wait, hold on, I mean, these are supposed to, one keeps the other in check. Perhaps in certain situations, you have to understand and aim your compassion appropriately. Use your brain, to figure out like, well, wait, okay, because in compassion, I guess the idea is you would be compassionate equally to everyone if possible, although I think there's always a tendency to go towards your tribe or something. I don't know if you could ever get that completely out of people, but it doesn't mean it doesn't conquer all. It doesn't, so like feeling compassion in a larger sense, it's a very good point, like what you just said, because giving heroin to somebody who is a heroin addict is not a compassionate thing to do, and it's also not compassionate for the rest of us. If you have these shoot ups, locations or whatever, and you end up with all these people who are selling crap on blankets outside of public buildings and shit, like in Vancouver. I think I've seen some of that. It's liberal little cities, like, and liberal big cities, they wind up with all these like weird problems that really should not be so hard to solve.
Hey, we've got crap. We have literal shit all over the streets in San Francisco because we're so compassionate.
Yeah. I had the other day. So here in Austin's becoming like a little California. I had a friend who made a good joke, Pat. He was like, but Keri, because there's so many Californians coming here, and he was like, but Keri, true California hasn't been tried yet. Maybe it'll work in Austin. Like true, we haven't seen true California yet, and so
that's great. Californianism, yeah, it's so true. Yeah, that's and people. The funny thing is they come there from California to escape California. Yeah, so, they're coming to Texas to get away from all that bureaucratic red tape. Maybe be able to run build a business or build a house. And now they come there and try to remake Texas and California's image.
So last week I met a couple who lives in my small Texas town. I live north of Austin, and they're from California, like me. And they said they just assumed I was liberal. A lot of people do, and I am a liberal. I'm just not a leftist.
Right.
And so they were like, they were basically happy. They're gleeful. They're like, even our small town used to be primarily Republican. It's changed. And they were like, it's becoming more blue. And there's a lot of Californians coming. We could use more California in Texas, if you know what I mean. And I'm like, I don't know what you mean. Like, I don't know, because you just got finished telling me that you left California because it had become unlivable. So why you're trying to recreate it here? I don't get it.
Yeah, you came to a better place, you know, and now you're like, yeah, we need to California you guys up a little bit here. Not enough feces on the streets.
It's
you know, it's have enough typhus in your big cities, you know. That's
exactly. Yeah, your crime rate's too low. Yeah, it's because there's no connection between, like, if there's no long-term thinking. The left has zero long-term thinking. At least it's kind of at the level of the everyday person on the left. Maybe the leaders do, but there's no long-term thinking at all. Zero.
Complete lack of it, and it's required, because long-term thinking would involve, like, knowing that, oh, this doesn't work. This philosophy killed 100 million people just this century, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
Eventually, you know. Yeah. I mean, like, if being hard on crime is compassionate, being, you know, like helping people discover, you know, the power of that is important. Criminals are bad people. You know, they're not all like these, like,
misunderstood,
who grew up in the wrong way and like, you know, whatever, and they never had a chance, and because of, you know what, we've leveraged it against them this way, we created this. It's like, no, some people just commit crime, and it's not compassionate to set a guy free without bail on his, you know, 30th assault arrest, and yet, you know, and New York is like worse than California on some of this too. I mean, like, really like liberal judges who, you know, I mean, like, they're thought of as liberal, who just don't believe that there's any bad people or anybody who could reoffend, you know, and they're not held responsible for any of that. Meanwhile, every police officer who, you know, takes his who yells or takes his firearm, his weapon out, you know, to take care of a problem is, you know, some kind of fascist stormtrooper. I mean, like, the last thing a cop wants to do ever is shoot anybody, because, you know what, they don't want to lose their jobs, or they don't want to, like, have the trauma. They don't want anybody dead. Yeah, I mean, like, they save lives. They give mouth to children in the projects and whatever. You know, if that's something that's still done, and I'm talking about, you know, during work hours and an appropriate situation. But, like, these are people, they go into the most difficult places and do the most difficult job, and yet they're shit on so freely, you know, by people that don't even give it a thought, to just say, like, oh yeah, out murdering the unarmed black men. You know, that whole hands up, don't shoot was a lie. Eric Holder, you know, the AG of the country, went to Ferguson, looked at the whole thing. If anybody's going to be able to find something wrong with it, it's going to be him, and it came out clean. And yet people will still go, what about Ferguson? And, you know, if you have any long-term thinking, you can remember that, or you would have, you know, you can sort of plug that into the overall equation. But they go, it doesn't matter, because it's the overall truth that matters more than anything. And so if it's a rallying point, that's fine.
It's the narrative that matters more than anything.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's in California. My wife was just telling me, I guess we've passed, this is not on the level of murder, but I guess there's some law now where, like, I don't know if it's all California or just locally, they've said we're not gonna convict anyone who steals less than $800 worth of property. And so, like, what has happened? There's, like, some guys, you're just reading an article, some guy's, like, been before the judge 13 times, and he just keeps, like, there's no big deal, right? I mean, they keep
like, what do you do? You, like, walk up
to this up.
Excuse me, how much was that phone? $799. Excellent. And
yes.
Now I mean, like, what a terrible message to send. You know what I mean?
Right.
That the possessions of people who can't afford stuff that's over $800 don't matter.
Yeah.
Wait, what an incredibly disrespectful law to pass. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's that no long-term consequences. It's just no long-term thought. Like, there's no they don't understand that, like, this sets up an incentive and people's behavior changes, and this is what it will change to, right? And there's also a willful blindness to any of the hidden costs, right? There's like, oh, I have compassion for the guy we let out of jail, but not for the future victims that we haven't met yet or seen in the news, right? Because we don't see them.
Very racist of you to say that, is I'm sure would be their response. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you assume that just because
I didn't say anything about race.
No, well, I know, but, like, that's all they have.
Yeah.
It's a very
I'm also a Nazi. Then in that case, you might as well throw that in.
No, I mean, like, hey, as a fellow racist and Nazi, you know, understand, I'm saying it with love, but, you know, it comes. That's the you made a very nuanced and good point. You know, that people are, obviously unaware of the fact that, like, yeah, there's going to be victims. That's the idea. They're sort of like saying, hey, you're going to be a victim, and we're not going to do anything about it unless you have like a significant amount stolen from you. I mean, like, okay, if it's true that a lot of petty crime, I mean, like, I assume the reason for that law is because petty theft laws disproportionately affect minority communities or something, right?
I don't know the reason, but I would assume that with you.
Okay, so let's say if that's the assumption, then what they're doing is kind of creating a petty theft reparations sort of, method where, like, we're not going to punish anybody for, just taking something from you. So,
right, but it also it hurts it hurts people who are also poor, many of whom are disproportionately non-white. Because if someone steals $800 from someone living in a $5 million house, it's not a big deal. But if someone steals $800 from someone who has $840 in their bank account, that's
right.
Like
that's
a big
rent.
deal. Yeah,
you're very right. But that's, again, you're using your brain and mixing it up. It's just, man, I think that must be appealing to be in that camp, because you can leave your brain at home. In fact, you must leave your brain at home in order to subscribe to that philosophy. How relaxing that must be, to be so convicted of all your beliefs, and just by reading it someplace and saying, yeah, that's what I think. And I'm not, the problem is they don't ever get to enjoy it, really. You know what I mean? Because
they don't recognize that that's what they're doing.
Yeah, they think they're working hard to change the world, I guess, or whatever. But, like the show that I talk about sometimes and promote, Too Woke to F, it's a show that I think deserves attention, because, like, it takes all these assumptions that we're talking about to the logical point of conclusion, and when you do that, it's a very interesting thought experiment. And it's on iTunes or whatever. Too Woke to F, and it's using the number 2, Too Woke to F. It's interesting in that way, because you'll never hear a couple of guys who are more divorced from self-awareness or, convinced that they're in the wrong about everything for being, the white guys that they are.
Huh. Yeah, Keri, you said you've heard that show before.
I had to run away for a second. I'm sorry. There's someone at my door.
Oh.
So, wait. So what show are you talking about?
Too Woke to F.
Oh yeah, it's it makes me think of Titania McGrath, who's also super woke.
Well, yeah, and probably big allies.
Book out about woke or something.
She does. Do you guys remember? Do you remember Godfrey Elfwick? Either of you?
I don't think so.
I do.
Godfrey Elfwick got banned, which is hard to understand because he's so woke. But he was wrong skin. He was on Twitter and he was basically like, I forget. He was like trans-abled and trans race and Muslim atheist.
I do remember that. Yeah, that was great. Muslim atheist.
Yes.
So great. Yeah, you have to embody all that stuff to be right 100% of the time.
Yeah. And as Carter and I have pointed out before, to get back to the mental health thing, a lot of times they put that in their bio, like it's a part of their SJW identity, because especially like if you're a white guy and wanting to have some victim status, it's like, what easier way to do that than to be either trans or to have some type of mental health issue or to be atheist, because they count that as one. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, differently abled because you're going to go to hell, I guess, but like...
Wait, differently abled is the thing? You can't just say disabled?
Differently abled now, I think, is the...
Yeah.
Disabled is a diss, I guess.
Lame. Now. I can't put lame.
You can't say lame.
I'm retarded and lame. I'll put that in, yeah.
Carter, lame is one of the ones they attack. Absolutely, you can't say lame. They have an entire... There's an article that came out last year that said it was like 6... seemingly innocuous phrases that are actually deeply racist and you shouldn't use. I think it was a Bustle piece. And it was stuff that it was like a long time no see. They said this is racist because it's making fun of, it has its origins in making fun of Native Americans who couldn't speak proper English. Long time no see. And I'm like, here's the thing.
I was sure you're going to go for blind people on that one.
Yeah, me too.
But they take these things. They take these things that don't have any like, if let's say they did have a racist past, we don't know about that today, and nobody uses them in a racist way. So why would you then make them racist again?
So we can fight about it.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to create, this chaos. How can you ever settle such a thing? Is it okay to say long time no see, or is it the most anti-Native American thing you can do? Well, that's a stupid argument that they want us to spend time on. Like that. But the point you bring up is important. Because what are you even doing? And that's the whole, I think that's the design behind it. But look how far they have to go to rake up something that they can, present as true racism or oppression or something. Back to long time no see. All the way back to the origins of the United States. Oh my God, please.
It's like a self-parody. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, you can find fault with anything, and that also means, I think the subtext of that is that you're walking around saying all sorts of insensitive, racist things all the time without knowing it. You should be quiet.
You should be quiet. That's what they want.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's original sin in the sense of like you're guilty, like you're just guilty. So just shut up and write a check.
Yeah, please.
Well, so I have to leave soon. I have to get to
we kind of just let this show keep going.
It was fun though. It was fun, but I wanted to leave on a positive note, maybe. Do you think, Pat, that the tide is kind of, because sometimes Carter and I think sometimes that the tide is turning, that like maybe people are getting, if you look at the Covington thing and if you look at the Jussie Smollett thing, that like the public is waking up to this ideology. Like all the normie people who are out there are learning about it and are like, screw this. Do you kind of think the tide is turning a bit against it?
Well, the more people who have kids that are convicted of crimes when, they're harassed by somebody and just defend their property, stuff like that. I mean, at some point, you do awake that, the sleeping giant or whatever, the people that are out there who don't agree with this. Most people don't. And keep that in mind. I wish advertisers would keep that in mind. I wish big corporations would keep that in mind and stop running scared from every campaign that's designed to make you fire somebody who didn't do anything wrong. It's maybe the tide is turning. It would be nice if there was some kind of a new awakening, because can you imagine right now if there weren't leftists doing all this shit, how much fun this would be right now? Things are pretty good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's hope that that's the case. And until then, if you're out there, anybody who is kind of like not speaking up about any of this stuff or whatever, fear is the enemy that they use, and it's the weapon that they use. And like, if you speak up afraid, you're not going to speak up well, and you're not going to speak up with conviction. So become convicted of the things that you hold as opinions. Become convicted of what is actually true, and stick to your objective, not your objective reality, to objective reality, and your understanding of that. And use that as your source of strength, and like know that really, there's nothing they can do if you live out in the open.
I love that.
That's a great way to end the show, Pat. Thank you. Can you remind people where they can go to check out your stuff one last time? Absolutely, yeah. crimereport.nyc. There's a lot of my podcasts there, and that's crimereport.nyc. Or follow me on Twitter at Pat Dixon, PatDixon. Thanks for having me. This is a great show, and I'm sure you guys are going to go on for a long run. We really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a lot of fun. And sorry for the technical issues at the beginning, and sorry to the audience for the technical issues at the beginning. But I think that's enough sorries. Finally worked. I know someone in the chat told me to stop feeling bad about it, but I can't. I'm a white man and I am guilty. So that's just the way it is. Just give thank yous. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience. Please go to unsafespace.com. Follow us on Twitter at Unsafe Space, or if you're a Gab user, you can go to Unsafe on Gab, and we'll try and maybe be on it more often. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.